Hi guys, welcome back to my channel where the gnomes live. This is Sharon Oyella and this is part 2 of our sewing card twig bed. In the first video we made the bed itself with twigs and a postcard or a vintage sewing card. And if you missed part 1, you can find the link to that in the pinned comment below. So in this video we're going to be finishing off this bed by making a canopy. I'm also going to be lighting up the bed and I'm going to be making a posable blanket using upholstery fabric. And by posable, I just mean I'm going to be putting wire in there, and it's just going to make it easier for photos later when I'm doing photo shoots with the bed, that I could pose the blanket any which way I want to. I didn't make a mattress for this one, I just sewed a piece of fabric to some fake fur. But not to worry if you need help making a mattress. I have that on video already. So I make a mattress and I stuff it. I also make a pillow and a pillowcase. So if you want to see how that's done, you'll go to the pinned comment below, click the link that I've provided for you. Once you're at that other video, then you'll look in its timestamps and you can jump right to the bedding. So this video that you're watching right now is just going to focus on the canopy and also on the posable blanket. Alright my friends, we are going to be using upholstery fabric in this video, and that's because I get this beautiful frayed edge using this fabric. So you pull some of the threads away, you'll get a frayed edge. It's a little bit tricky to work with, but not difficult. So I'll walk you through that in the video, of course. And I said upholstery fabric, but it could be called, it could be fabric for drapes as well. It's just a thicker, wonderful fabric. And I got mine at a thrift store, so it came in a bag full of scraps. Look at this one here. Isn't that beautiful? It reminds me of some of the homes that I saw on my Europe trip where they had grand homes and some of their beds and curtains were made out of fabric such as this. Anyway, you can use whatever fabric you have on hand. You do not have to use the same type of fabric that I'm using. And of course you want a thread that matches the fabric that you are using. And I make a posable blanket using wire. That's 20 gauge wire. I'm going to use a piece of chalk and a ruler, a pair of scissors of course, tacky glue, and some twine. And not pictured here, I'm also using a very thin gauged wire, and that is going to help build the canopy base. So I'll show that in the next clip. Let's get started. Alright, to make the canopy, the base for the canopy, I'm going to use twine, and I'm just going to fray the ends, and I'm going to wrap those frayed ends around the post using wire. So I'm going to be leaving the wire on these posts. If I wanted to take the wire off, then of course I'd be putting tacky glue on there first, and then wrapping the wire, and then just leave it hanging, and then I could take the wire off later. In the end, I just decided to keep it all together and just cut off the excess there. It'll be hidden under the fabric anyway. Once they're on, then a layer of tacky glue, and I'm just using a little bit of water on my fingers to make it easier for me to get that glue spread all over. And as always, once you leave the twine to dry, make sure it's sitting in exact position that you want it to, because once it's cured, it's going to keep that position. And then I decided to add one on each end of the bed as well. So again, fray the ends, wrap with wire. And then I put one in the center. I didn't attach it with wire. I just frayed the ends and attached the ends to the dried twine on each side. If I was to do this again, I would have put 3 across the top, or maybe even more, because later on I'm going to have to do a correction, and I'm going to show you how I corrected it. One would have worked, I think, but it was just driving me a little bit batty because on each end the fabric was kind of drooping. So I'll show you how I fix that later. But yeah, I put one in the center. Lots of glue on the ends, and then just wrap those ends around the dried twine. And you want to make sure that those 2 pieces that I'm attaching this one wet piece to are dry already. If you're going to put another layer of tacky glue, you just have to wait until it's dry to the touch, and then you can go ahead and put the tacky glue on there. It's still going to be a little bit soft until it fully cures. Okay, so it's going to need some time. Like, leave it overnight, check it the next day, and you'll see a huge difference in how it feels. Alright, I'm going to move on to sewing up some fabric, and this is what it looks like the next day. Looks pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. So, as I always say, I'm not an expert in sewing, guys. I'm always just winging my way along. This is upholstery fabric, and I really like the colors. I thought it matched in well. I want to put the canopy on the top, so I was first going to do the rectangle on the right, but then I decided to add a little bit more of a curved tail on each corner, and that way I could fold up the ends and then sew those around the post to start with. If you've ever worked with upholstery fabric, you'll know that wherever you cut the fabric, it's going to keep fraying until there's nothing left. So you either have to sew in a seam or do what I'm doing here, and that is sewing it straight to the canopy itself. And the edge of the fabric is being wrapped around the posts, and then I'm sewing it in that way. That way I didn't have to do a seam first, and that worked out well. You can see it's hanging over the edge enough where I could sew it to the twine. So here's the part that was driving me a little bit batty. The fabric was falling on either end. Wasn't a big deal, but if I pushed on it, you could see it would drop down. So I just took some plastic that I got out of my tomato package that I got at the grocery store, and I cut it a little bit too long, rounded out the ends, and then I pushed it in on either seam of the canopy, and the pressure is holding it up. Now, I didn't have a wide enough piece to do just one piece on each side, so I had to put in 4 pieces all together. But I'm leaving this in the video because I want you to know that there's always options. If you screw it up along the way like I did, there's always an option to fix it. I did end up sewing the plastic end, like the ends of the plastics, in place later on before I put in another piece of fabric. But before we get there, I'm just going to add some twine around this part of the canopy. And this is more a decorative piece, and just to kind of clean up the inside edge, because the inside edge doesn't meet with each other. So I have thread holding everything together, so I'm just covering it up with twine. So a little bit of tacky glue and then a clamp until it dries, and then I can cut the excess off. A little dot on the end just to keep the end down. And for the panels, I did 4 of these, and you can see one little notch there in the top corner, and that's because it's going to be sewn around the post, and the top part is going to be sewn underneath the canopy. You can see it's wider than half of the canopy, and it follows the same slope as the canopy on the top there. And then the side that's going to be against the post is no longer than the post. The length of the fabric is no longer than the post. Maybe just a little bit there. And then the front side of the panel, away from the post, is longer. I'm going to be doing a 1/4 inch seam around 3 sides of the panel, each panel. 1/4 inch seam around 3 sides. I'm not going to do the seam on the top because that's going to be sewn underneath the canopy. Before I do any sewing, I'm going to take an exact copy of this piece here. So I need to do this twice so I can have a mirrored copy of a pair of panels. So I need 4 of them. 2 of them need to be a mirror copy of each other for each side of the bed. And here we go. I've done 3 sides, and I did not sew the top side. It's not perfect, but I did the 1/4 inch seam, and then I took scissors and just kind of cleaned up those edges. Okay, so now I can sew the top in, and it's going to be sewn right to the canopy, right underneath. And as I was sewing, like I said earlier, I did sew right through the plastic as well, so it took a little bit more effort to get the needle through the plastic pieces, but it worked great. So I just sewed through there. And once I got to the other side, we'll get there in a second, guys. I'm just showing how, see, I have to push through that plastic. Okay, so once I got to this side, the video didn't actually turn out so well, so I'm going to show you on the other side how I got that notched part sewn down. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on its side, make it easier, and flip that raw edge under, so it gives me a nice clean edge to work with, and just line it up at the post. And now I can just sew the canopy right to that notched out part. But again, I did flip it under, so I have a nice edge there. And this thread that I got is a perfect color match. I really got lucky there. Okay, and then at the end, just still working here. My thread was getting a little bit too short, so I'll show you on the other other one now. Just knot off when you're done, and just carry the thread through, and then cut it free. And then I took a little dot of tacky glue right at the very bottom there, just to keep that in place. So just at the very bottom, just 1 dot. Okay, I'm just showing you how nicely that sewing worked out there on that notched out part. And I still have that is open along the post, but the very bottom is glued in. And that's the only part I'm going to glue in. Now I'm just going to fold it back, and with a piece of twine, I'm going to tie it to the post. And I want the option of using these curtains in the future for setup for photos and stuff, so I just want to tie them with twine. Tuck the twine away so it's not seen, but I can untie it later. So I am going to add a panel along the top of the canopy as well, like underneath, to hide up the plastic. And again, that plastic has been sewn in, so even if it gets pushed down from the top, it's not going to go anywhere. So I sewed in along the edges. Okay, all the edges have been sewn. And again, you don't have to use plastic. I only did that because I kind of screwed up, remember? Okay, so I'm going to sew in this fabric here, and it's going to be too difficult to show you on video because the bed is so small, my fingers will just be in the way. But I just sew around the edge and a couple of stitches in the center as well to keep it all in place. And then I went to the dollar store and grabbed a couple of lights, and I didn't know which ones I wanted to use. I ended up using these ones here. These were the cheapest ones I found, actually. They were $1.75, and they have leaves, like a string of leaves attached to them. So I've actually never seen ones like this before that come this small. So I'm going to add a little twig here. I'm just going to glue this in place so I can have my lights wrapping around it, just above the headboard. And I'm going to glue the battery pack underneath the bed. Before I do that, I'm going to just add a couple of stitches here just to hold the vines in place. It didn't take very many. And just go from the top, wrap around the string, and then back up again. Any place that I felt it needed a stitch, I'd put one in, and then knotted it off and carried the thread away just like I showed you earlier, and then cut free. And now I can glue the battery pack to the bottom of the bed. I'm using E6000 bead all around the edge. And of course you want to make sure that you're gluing the right side down where you can actually still open it up and replace the batteries when you need to. And to get this to stick until the glue cures, I'm going to use hot glue, so right down the center there. And now I can just place this where I want it. And for the extra wire that's hanging loose, I'm going to do a bead of hot glue. Now this glue gun was unplugged, so it's not extremely hot. I don't want to melt the wire itself, so just a cooler bead of hot glue there, and it would hold that wire in place perfectly. Doesn't need to be extremely hot, just sticky. So a bead right there, and then stick the wire right inside, and I'm able to touch the glue with my fingers. That's how much it's cooled down. And that did a perfect job. I'm really happy with how that turned out. Alright, so now we're going to make the blanket, and I'm going to use the same material as I did for the canopy. So this is my first attempt. I'm just showing you how posable it is. I have wire in all four sides. I made it a little bit too small. I also tried to pass it under my sewing machine, and I broke my needle because I hit the wire and I only had white thread for my machine. So I'm going to remake this, but I'm going to make the upholstery patches, the squares, bigger than my first batch, and then I'm going to cut them down after. So I want to sew the wire to the wrong side of the fabric, of course, so I'm going to flip this over. And I'm using 20 gauge wire, which is actually not strong enough for it to hold its shape on its own, so I'm going to double it up. So I'll fold it over, and at the bend I'm going to twist to make a loop. And then the other end I'm cutting too long, and so I can bend that over and make a loop on this end as well. So bend it over and twist. And then the raw edge of the wire, the part that I just twisted, I'm going to put a little sliver of masking tape just over that pointy part. I never want that to poke through the fabric. And now I'm going to wrap that end with thread to ensure it never comes apart, even if the masking tape gets ripped somehow. So I'll just wrap it right up, covering up that masking tape. And now I can just tie off the ends together. I'll make a couple of knots. And there's my one loop and the other loop, and you can see I didn't cut the thread short. I'm just going to leave it loose in there. And now I'm going to sew in the first loop, and you want to make sure that you sew this in really well so that the wire never slips free from its thread. So I'm going to be doing a number of stitches around the loop. And once I'm done sewing the loop in, I'm going to carry the thread over about 1/2 inch or so, and then put in a couple of stitches right here. And then I can move the thread over again and do a couple of stitches. And I went all the way down to the other end and then sewed in the other loop. So there's stitches every 1/2 inch or so, and not just one. You want to put 2 or 3 stitches in to make sure that wire never moves. I sewed all the way around that loop, and now I'm just going to knot off here, and then I'll cut free. You want to be able to bend the blanket without that wire moving at all. So more stitches the better. And of course you want to have a good color match thread to your fabric. So I sewed the wire in on the other end. And now I'm going to sew my 2 pieces together. So I'll just get my thread ready, pulling it through. Now I can place the other piece on top. Of course this is wrong sides together. And to ensure I get a straight line, I'm going to draw a line with a piece of chalk using my ruler. I'm just going to make sure I'm going above my wire in there. And to hold my fabrics together, I'm using binder clips. And now I can just sew along that chalk line. So I'm doing short running stitches right down the line. When I got to the other end, I did knot off and cut free. And so I'm going to start the next line. I'm going to turn it and draw another chalk line here. And you keep going like that until it's all closed up. But of course you can stop at the 3rd one If you want to stuff it, this is the point that you want to do it at. I decided not to stuff mine because I don't want to have a big fluffy blanket there because I want to see the graphic on my headboard. And once it was all sewn together, then I just cut off the excess fabric. And then I take a pointy tool, and on two sides I'm going to shred the fabric. So just shred it and then pull those threads. And it gives you a nice frayed edge. I do it on both sides. And once that was done, I realized I should probably clean up the other edges as well because I noticed some threads sticking out there. So what I'm doing is I've already threaded my needle. I'm just going to bring it through the side. And then I'm going to wrap it around and just cleans that up real nicely. I'm going to try to keep my sewing line pretty even going down. So it could help to do a chalk line if you needed to. So just like this, I'm just going to keep wrapping around from one end all the way to the other. And then once you get to the other end, of course, you just knot off and then carry the thread inside and cut it free. So my finished blanket is 6 1/4 inches wide and it's 6 1/2 inches long. And look at the difference between the second attempt and the first attempt. The second one still wasn't perfect, but I'm so happy with how it turned out. And I thought it wasn't perfect because it was too long. I put it on the bed, it was way too long, but I realized if I gave it a fold, and because the wire's in there, it's holding that fold, it looks like I have pillows in there already. So when I made the bed again, I realized it looked like I had pillows and I could still see that wonderful graphic that I was so worried about the entire time I was making the bed. So all the mistakes that I made, they were fixable, and we just rolled with the punches. So with all that said, guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up, share with your friends, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.